Hey everyone, thank you for joining. This webinar session is going to cover the new OWASP Top 10 that was recently released. So the OWASP Top 10 2021. I'm Sean Wright. I am the Principal Application Security Engineer at Immersive Labs. And in this webinar, we'll briefly cover what is the OWASP Top 10 and then kind of cover how the OWASP Top 10 has changed over the years and some of the takeaways that we can take from that. So, firstly, covering off what is the OWASP Top 10. Now, OWASP is the Open Web Application Security Project. It is a voluntary non-profit organization that originally started focused primarily at web applications, hence the name, but it's kind of morphed into other areas of software security. So things like mobile application, even getting into, I think there's later projects with embedded security. So they've really grown. It started off in OWASP itself, started off in 2001. And subsequently, there's numerous projects, contents, as well as conferences that they have. They also have local chapters all around the globe. So I highly recommend that you go look for your local chapter because they often put on local events, and it's a good way to network and learn new things. So coming back to the OWASP Top 10. So the OWASP Top 10 is a periodic list that's published by OWASP. And the goal of this is to highlight or try to cover common vulnerability categories. I know sometimes they refer to vulnerabilities, but more often not, it's more categories. So a bit broader than just individual vulnerabilities. And it's kind of become a de facto industry standard. It's very hard these days to talk about application security and not even refer to the OWASP Top 10. It's something that's used throughout the industry, from training material to tooling, to even working with the developers and that when you're trying to talk to them and you're covering security, you often refer to the OWASP Top 10. The very first list was published in 2003, and this list now is currently the 8th list. So there's been quite a few published. So why have this list in the first place? Well, it's an excellent starting point for when you're trying to introduce security in your application and development. There are so many vulnerabilities out there that it can be really difficult to kind of gauge where you should start. Since these are the most prevalent and often the highest risk vulnerabilities, these are the ones that you probably want to look at first. These are the ones that if you solve, you're probably going to reduce the risk a lot. Not completely, but significantly reduce the risk. So it allows you to focus on higher priority and higher severity issues, reducing risk. It also then allows for common language. So if your developers and your security folk both speak in things like, for example, one of the categories in there is injection. It gives a common language, so it allows your developers to understand what your security team is talking about and vice versa. And that also helps break down sometimes those barriers that you see, where there can sometimes, unfortunately, be a lot of friction. It's also, as I said previously, it's used across many tools. So a lot of scanners will have references to the OWASP Top 10. Even our labs on the platform, our secure coding labs, they have references to the OWASP Top 10 as well. And education material. So as I mentioned, our labs, but also a lot of internal education presentations and that can also refer to the OWASP Top 10. One of the things that I actually realized when I was spending time and reviewing and researching the OWASP Top 10 and going over it from a higher level and reviewing all of the past OWASP Top 10 lists, is it's a good way to get little snapshots of the industry and seeing where things are going. One of the things that I noticed, for example, is after the 2004 list, you'll see that thing, a category, buffer overflow exploits, disappeared from the list and never reappeared. And that points to a deviation of the industry and the way we moved away from technologies such as CGI-based scripts and moved to technologies that didn't really have, or there's no way of really achieving buffer overflow exploits. So you're talking things where there's managed memory. So, for example, Java. And that was pretty interesting to see. You could also see the introduction of new categories. So, for example, vulnerable libraries. That was a marked point where you could actually see the change in the industry of how we started to adopt open source more and more. So again, these lists are very good to see different trends, assessing where the industry is moving, what is working and what isn't working. So that's covering why we have our top 10 list and what it's all about. Now diving into the new list. So this is the list that was published 24th of September. And some things to note, the ones highlighted in orange are the new categories. So insecure design, server-side request forgery are completely new categories. Software and data integrity failures is kind of a new category, but it kind of follows on, it has one of the existing categories as a subset. One of the things that I've noticed in these categories is the term failures. To me, it kind of indicates that we're now reaching a point where a lot of security is there, it's provided, and it's just being misused. So if you look at the way frameworks are evolving, modern frameworks, to have things like cross-site scripting or SQL injection out of the box is very difficult. You actually have to do something wrong. You have to apply it incorrectly to get those vulnerabilities. If you use the default and it's becoming secure by default, that's where the industry is kind of going. So the term failures to me kind of indicates this, where we're having these security features and that allow and built into the frameworks and applications, and there's failures to either leverage them correctly or they're being misused. So that was one of the interesting things that I noted there. The other interesting thing is you'll see things like SQL injection and cross-site scripts and that they're now starting to form a single category, which means that those issues are becoming less and less prevalent. They're no longer standing out on their own. And that kind of, again, is pointing to the way the industry is moving, where a lot of things are being done securely by default in these modern frameworks and even some of the libraries. As I said, one of the good things about the OWASP Top 10 is to take a step back and do a reflection and see how we compare. So this here is a comparison with the last OWASP Top 10, which was published in 2017. One of the kind of worrying things is if you have a look there, every single category from the 2017 list is now in one or more, or in one of the categories in the 2021 list. So this to me means we're still not quite there where we kind of taking these lists and learning and trying to adapt and trying to fix things. But I think we're getting there. So as I mentioned, something like cross-site scripting. Now, cross-site scripting, if you have a look at it, it's been around for decades. It's been out since the late 90s. and we still were talking about it there in 2017, even 2021. But I think we're at that turning point, and this is where we're going to get on later, where technology used in conjunction with things like education awareness is going to really help change things. In the past, I think we focused too much on lists like this and trying to rather focus individually on the different parts in the list rather than trying to figure out, take a step back and think of different ways of trying to prevent these things. And also, we have to remember that software is also evolving. The way we develop software is constantly changing. If I look back to when I first started and where it is now, it is a completely different thing. We have things like CI/CD, DevSecOps, and that. So the pace is just going enormously fast. So we're going to have to adapt. And I think things are moving in the right direction. So yeah, comparing those two lists, out of there, again, I wasn't too surprised. A lot of the things there are things that we still see. But yeah, I think we're moving in the right direction. This, however, was a bit of a disappointing thing to see. So this is the comparison between the 2003 list and the current list. And the 2003 list is the very first list that was published. And if you look at that, 7 of the top 10 from the 2003 list can be applied in some shape or form to the 2021 list. So 70% are still issues today. Well, that's correct. It's what, 18 years later. So we have to change the way we do things. We're still doing the same thing over and over and over again, 18 years later, decades later, with things like cross-site scripting and sequence injection. But as I pointed out, there's some things that are falling away. So if you go look at like buffer overflows, that's gone. Error handling problems, maybe you could argue it's kind of still there, but it's in the OWASP top 10 list, it's kind of fallen away. Same as unvalidated parameters. So there's a lot of work for us still to do, but I think we are getting to that point. So as I mentioned, some of the takeaways that we can take from this is we're still battling to solve decades-old challenges. We have to adapt and change the way we're doing some of the things. And as I mentioned, we are kind of starting to that. So a good example, I once got called out to go help a team that had no knowledge of security. And they were developing a full-based web application. And it was one of the most boring pen tests I've ever done, but in a good way. I couldn't find anything exciting. It was more business logic flaws that weren't that terribly exciting. SQL injection, nothing. Cross-site scripting, nothing. Why? Because they're using Django, and Django helped and catered for all of that. So this is where technology helps. This is where technology can help not only also prevent these vulnerabilities, but also then give time back to development teams. Think about it. If you're going to have to go manually encode every single field, that's a whole bunch of time. If you have a framework that automatically does that for you, now your developers can focus more on delivering new features and functionality. So this is where secure frameworks can help speed up and aid development. But that alone is not enough. So we've seen instances where you have all these secure frameworks, but someone unfortunately works around them because there's some caveat position or that, and they will then introduce the vulnerability. So by nature, some of these frameworks do allow you to override some of the protections that they have. So for example, in HTML encoding, you can override that in many of these frameworks with certain keywords. And the thing I've seen often is developers love code reuse. So if you have a flaw or weakness in a portion of code and it's really popular code, that flaw or weakness is going to be copied time and time again. So this is where you need the education and awareness to understand what those different flags mean and the risks are. So if you switch off this HTML encoding, what does it mean? And that's where something like a labs can help. You get that understanding of what it means to switch that off and how it can impact the security of the application. And that goes with the equipping the knowledge and awareness. So really understanding how to use those technologies, how to configure things correctly. There will be cases where you need to disable that, but understand what those cases are and how you can still provide the appropriate protection around that. And also, one of the reasons why many people copy code is because they don't always understand it. It works, it does what they need, they'll just copy it and save their time. And you can't blame them. So, coming towards the end of this session, very quick overview of OWASP Top 10. But if you want to read more, there's a blog post that wrote and published on the corporate site. It's available at that URL, or if you go to our site, immersivelabs.com, and go to resources and blog, you should be able to find it there as well. Alongside that, we've also published a cheat sheet that you can download by the blog. I've also been told that you should also be able to download that cheat sheet via this webinar as well. We've also published 2 of the OWASP Top 10 labs that are in a new series covering the new OWASP Top 10. Those are available in the community mode. So you can try those out, see what they are like in the platform. So these labs is a new series. We have one introducing what the OWASP Top 10 is, and then we have one lab on each of the categories. And they cover an explanation of what the vulnerability is, the impact, how to remediate, and kind of giving a relevant real-world example. For me, real-world examples are really important to understand the impact, because ultimately the impact is what we need to prevent. So having that reference to a real example just helps re-emphasize that impact. In terms of our existing labs, as I mentioned, we do reference the OWASP Top 10. So we will be going through a process where we'll be updating our existing labs to make sure that they reflect the new OWASP Top 10 list as well. So without further ado, I'm just going to see if there are any questions. Bear with me for a moment. Sorry, I'm just trying to pop out the questions. Great. So there are quite a few questions. So first one, will this be available for future viewing? I'm pretty sure our webinars are recorded and put on our YouTube site. So I don't hold me to it, but I think it will be. Next one, is there a demo labs in the OWASP Top 10 going to be shown? Sorry, just trying to read these questions. So is there a demo immersive labs in the OWASP Top 10 going to be shown? No, because these OWASP Top 10 labs are theory-based, there's not much value in showing them, and they're available in the community edition. So you're most welcome to go give them a try on the community edition. There are 1 or 2 practical labs that tie in with OWASP Top 10. So for example, we have one of the node labs that is SQL injection, I think, in the community mode that you can also try out there. How does OWASP collect this information? Good question. So if you go to the OWASP site, they have a whole description. The OWASP top 10. So just Google OWASP top 10 will take you to their homepage. They have a whole section on how they come up with this, these different categories and ordering and the data that they get. So they process a whole bunch of data that's provided to them by organizations and the community. So highly recommend that you go have a look at that, because they go into a lot of depth of how they came up with these and scores and that. Could I post the links? We'll see if I can do that. So the YouTube channel, so there's a question, what is the YouTube channel name where you be uploading? If you go to YouTube and you look for Immersive Labs, you should be able to find a Immersive Labs channel, and then you should be able to get it from there. I'm just going to give it one moment to see if there are any other questions. Otherwise, I will call it. Let me see if I can. I'm going to see if I can share this. If not, we'll see if we can find out a way to, I'll share it there. I think that might work there. I'll also see if there's a way that we can share those links and see if we can even get the YouTube channel link and share that afterwards. And as well as the details on how to register for the community mode. Great. Just give it one more moment. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your time. Hopefully this has been useful and helpful, and hope you all have a great day.